Jay, if you can hear me, can we check audio, make sure on your end we can hear okay? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment just to double check that you can hear me okay. Yes. Okay, great. So we are going to get started. Thank you so much for joining. We're joining them. I'm going to share my screen one more time and get started. Thank you again. All right. Happy Sunday to some of you who are still on this side of the world. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you again. Just adding the presentation right now. And this broadcast, this webinar and podcast as well, is about personal branding. I've done a few of these already, and I think people are just very interested in learning a craft around personal branding that goes beyond just putting your attributes on a resume, going on LinkedIn and posting who you are or who you think you are or who you want to be or want people to think you are. Because what I've learned is that your brand is not who you say you are, either on paper or on LinkedIn or to your friends or to your employer. It really is how you make people feel. And most people have not stopped to think about that aspect of branding. And that is truly what makes a personal brand. So I learned this the hard way in my own experience. And it was through a lot of different things that happened to me. My journey started many years ago in personal branding. And I don't even think it was called personal branding back then. It was more of the understanding of how I showed up to people through a series of things that happened. And through that journey, I learned a few things that a brand actually has some attributes that we have to consider in order to build that brand first. Before we even go out there and create a resume, get on LinkedIn and put on all these add-ons of who we are, how we expect people to see us, we really have to think of these key elements to build that brand first. And those are mission, very important before anything. You really have to have a mission about who you are, why you're here. You get to do that for yourself. You get to create that mission for yourself. You have to have attributes, intended attributes. You have to understand that you need to show up consistently through many channels, digitally, in person. These attributes will get you known in the world out there, and people will connect to your brand because you have these distinct attributes that make up who you are. And you get to craft that, nobody else. You have to have a character. Who are you in your own story? You have a story. Your story started when you were born. How are you playing that character through? What has happened to that character? Has it evolved? Has it grown? Hopefully it has. So all these things about the character that you have played up until now, how do you use that character in this story and take it to the next level, right? The story, it has to have a story. So your brand is not just data points. It's not just bullet points on your resume. Those are just data. It's really, how does that data come together in story form so that when you get in front of that employer, when you get in front of that hiring company, you're able to succinctly talk about those data points and say, this is why it's important to me. This is what happened to me. That's a story, right? And SEO, you have to have digital presence. In fact, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. Because I've discovered in my own journey that when people know you, when you get in front of their faces and they get to know who you are consistently, then they're thinking, if a position opens up, hey, I would like to work with someone like Miri. I like her values. I like what she stands for. And so you're top of mind to them because you have this digital presence. If you don't have that presently, it's really hard to put a resume to a page to someone's personality or someone's values. It's really hard to envision this person coming into a company and how they tie into your culture. So really interesting that the digital presence right now, it's actually your digital resume. People are looking you up online. People are trying to find out what you're about beyond that piece of paper. So there are key elements of a brand that most people don't consider. Maybe you've been in different sessions of personal branding, and they talk about create your values, create your mission, put it all together in one piece of paper. But it's beyond that, right? It's the mission. You need to craft that very succinctly. So we're going to go through that today. And my journey started, as I said, a few years ago, and it started in 2012. This is actually a picture of me when I first started this journey. It's also around the same time I began my work at Microsoft. So I came in August 2012. That is my first profile picture that you see there. And of course, I'm very happy to come into Microsoft. I was called by the company one day randomly, got a phone call, and they said, "Hey, we're a recruiter from Microsoft. We want to talk to you." And I was very excited. And of course, I said yes. So I came in and was very happy to be there. Only my happiness lasted a few days only. That grin went away real fast. And that's because I found myself in a place where I was being bullied by 4 women within Microsoft, older women. And so they were about, had been there longer than I had, clearly, within the company. And, I was very lost. Immediately, I felt, oh, I don't belong here. This is not the place for me. My imposter syndrome immediately kicked in. I didn't know why I was being bullied. I thought it was me. I thought, clearly I didn't belong. I went through this for an entire year, and I was growing increasingly frustrated until one day I came to work, and 2 of these women had done something to me, and I lost it. I grabbed my laptop and I said, "I'm out of here. I can't do this anymore." So I was walking out, and one of these PM that worked with me grabbed my arm, and he said, "No, you really can't go." And I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean I can't go? Of course I can go. I'm going to quit." And he said, "No, you can't go because we need you here, and you need to just go home and sleep on that decision. Come back tomorrow. Don't quit." So I went home, as he said, and I asked myself a very important question. I asked, why would I come back the next day if I did come back? And suddenly I realized my status. At that moment, I had no purpose. I didn't have a why. I had been living my life all the way to that moment of unintentional, right? Like, things just happened. I went to school, I got married, a couple kids. There was nothing that I was doing intentionally for someone, with a purpose. So I had no purpose. I had a bunch of mixed attributes. Basically, that means that I was just, I could be mean one day, I could be happy one day, I could be sad. There was nothing that you could say consistently, Miri is this. Like, when I meet Miri, if I meet her in person and if I meet her online, she is always this. I just had a mix of attributes. I wasn't intentional. I wasn't showing up intentionally a certain way. Definitely no character definition. I didn't know who I was in my own story. If you asked me at that time, I saw myself as a victim in the story. So I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how I played in when things happened to me, who I was in my own story, right? I actually had no story. So things were happening. Clearly, I had a story, but it was kind of playing in the back of my mind. I was kind of walking around my own story in autopilot. I wasn't driving my story, right? And if you Googled me in terms of SEO, digital presence, back then, you would probably just find my address. That's it, or my parents' address. So that was me. And when I went home to think about these things, I said, wow, I don't even know where to start. Right? What happens if I go back? I want to go back, but why would I go back? And that's when my personal branding journey began. I wrote a statement for myself. This is it. And it still serves me today. Very simple. I used it to give me purpose, to give me a mission. Every brand has a mission. When you look at corporations, when you look at influencers, when you look at politicians, when you look at people, artists, they all have a mission. They all define themselves by something, and they actually target an audience. I started to think about that because I'm a marketer. So I knew these strategies from a marketing perspective. I knew that as a brand, you have to target an audience. You have to present yourself to appeal to that audience, and you have to have a purpose. So I created this statement for myself and started with this. So I want you to start thinking right now, as you're watching this, about your own statement, because you get to create it. And it may seem daunting. We're like, whoa, I have to have a life mission, life purpose. I don't even know if I could do that. You can. And then we're going to walk through this. But for me, I'll give you that example because for me, that's one instance, one data point in my life prompted this mission for myself. And so I broke it down first. I was like, okay, I am blank and blank. I don't even know what that is. I told you I have mixed attributes. So I broke it down and I said, let me start with my attributes. I need to know where I am, who I am right now. And I didn't know. So I went and I asked a bunch of people. I decided I needed a baseline. Basically, I needed to understand where I was going to start from, my starting point. And I did that by asking one big question. And it was the question, how do I show up? Right? Huge question. So your brand begins with you understanding who you are today. Because remember, as I said, your brand is not who you say you are. You can show up and be like, I'm this, I'm that. Okay. But that's not it. It's how you make people feel. When you walk into a room, when you leave that room, how do people feel when they meet you? Psychologically, as humans, we ask ourselves two questions immediately when we meet someone new. The first question, and this is subconscious, right? So it's happening in our heads, whether we like it or not, it's happening. We ask ourselves, hey, how, can I trust this person? If the answer is yes, if you answer to yourself, yeah, they look a little bit trustworthy, then the next question you ask immediately is, do I want to get to know them better? And if the answer is yes, you lean in, right? So you're not checked out. If the answer is no at the beginning, clearly you're going to check out. You don't even pay attention, right? So how do you position yourself in front of people in a way that they're going to answer yes? They're going to say, this person seems just trustworthy. They seem like they're coming in authentic. And I'm curious, what are they about? This works when you're in front of an interview, when you're in front of someone you want to get to know. This is branding. So you first need to know how you're going to show up, how you've been showing up, so that you can work from that baseline. So I asked people, and I recommend you do the same, how do I show up? Now, back then, we didn't have any mechanisms, any good technologies to do this anonymously. So I went around and actually asked people personally, which is a huge mistake because I wasn't being guided by this process. I was just kind of going through it by myself. And I should have known that I asked a lot of people that probably don't care about me much and don't want to see me succeed. So I recommend that when you do this homework, when you begin your personal branding journey, you ask people who you know, you trust. They are going to give you candid answers because they care for you and they want to see you succeed. So people you trust, mentors, teachers, colleagues, people that you've met, past employers that have voted, for you to win. So these are people you're going to ask, and you can use the mechanisms that exist today. You can use anonymous surveys, and you could say, hey, I took this class on personal branding. I'm throwing out a survey. I just want to know how I show up. And you're going to get a lot of answers. People are going to give you that answer, and hopefully it's going to be very candid, which is good because that's going to tell you where you stand. Now, for me, when I got answers here, there were a lot of answers. They were good. They were kind of harsh to read. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do with all these attributes, right? A lot of stuff showed up. Some things were themes, categories I was able to categorize. Other things were kind of outliers. I was like, oh, they knew I showed up like that. There were surprises. Other things were not surprising to me. I knew that I showed up a certain way. But again, I had a mix of attributes. So what am I going to go do with this? This right now, what do I want to be next and for whom? And that's when the next two things showed up in my head, right? If I went back to Microsoft, why would I go back? How would I go back? Showing up how? And for me, I began to think about what the world needed. Clearly, the world's a big place, right? 8 billion people. I don't know. The world needs a whole lot of things. So I reduced that audience to a target audience. As I said, a brand always markets and presents itself to a specifically targeted audience. So I targeted an audience. I said, I think there's other people being bullied right now. I think I'm probably not the only one. And possibly I don't know, I just got here, I'm new, but I can possibly talk about my experience and see who this reaches. I'm going to target a younger audience. I was in my mid-30s at the time, and I wanted to target mid-20s, early in career women in tech. Because when I came to tech, I knew we represent, less than 2% of that gender. And so I was like, whoa, if I had chosen to leave, then I'm actually closing that gap. It's not growing. So I don't want to do that. I want to contribute to the growth of that gap, right? So I'm going to do this by talking about my experience. I can't remove the bullies. I can't do anything about that. But what I can do is I can open up a new community and talk about my own experiences. That's where storytelling came in. I began to think about, it wasn't called storytelling back then, but that's in my head, I realized I could use my story, right? The power of storytelling to connect with my audience that I was going to target. So I want you to think about these things. I want you to think, again, you start with the baseline. Who are you right now? Then you say, okay, there's some attributes about me. People know me this way. I'm going to target an audience. What audience? Well, I don't know. Let's start with who you are. I want you to grab a piece of paper, blank sheet of paper. Let me see, I think I have some here. Just a blank sheet of paper, right? And grab a pen and put a dot somewhere along the line of that paper. This here is the day you were born. This begins your life story. That's where storytelling begins for branding. I'm going to illustrate this on the screen. That's the day I was born. I know I'm old, 1978. It's, for me, it was kind of flatline. It was flatline because I am the middle child. I came a few months after my older sister. We're kind of Irish twins, they call it. So the first time when she was born, everybody's like, "Oh, great, yay, the new baby." A few months later, a year later, I was born, and everybody's like, "Okay, you guys are poor. You can't afford to have more kids. Like, why are you having another kid right after?" So I wasn't really celebrated much. You know what I mean? Nevertheless, I was born. It was an okay day in my story, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna put that dot there, whether it's a high or low. You're gonna start creating these kind of highs and lows timeline of your life all the way to present. So I'm going to kind of illustrate this on the screen for you as well. Just some things you remember about your life, your next big moment or memory. It may seem inconsequential, but it isn't. Your brain is actually activating encoded memories because they were important to you. Even if they don't seem too important, the reason you remember them, whatever they are, put them on the sheet of paper and begin to kind of build this timeline. This is going to activate some things in your brain. It's going to begin to build your story of origin in a way that you are actually activating those encoded memories to give you themes and categories and things about yourself that you may not have even remembered. For me, when I actually did this exercise, this is a very general one. It's not all the way to the present. I have a very long life, so just giving you an illustration. But I did this exercise for myself, and I remembered when I was 7, I used to write poetry. I used to write use my school books, my notebooks to write poetry. I had tons of books of poetry. I wish I would have kept them. And I just realized I'm a writer. But I didn't know that. I ended up writing a book, but I didn't know that back then, right? So these kind of data points will help you uncover a lot more to that database that you're adding. So now you have how you show up, opinions. Now you have some data points, right, of your story. And your story is becoming your brand. You're seeing these patterns of things who you are that make you uniquely you. Nobody else has this. Nobody in the world can put this plan together, only you. This is your differentiator. Right? Sometimes some of you may have been like, "Oh my gosh, everybody says differentiate yourself in the market." How? Everybody's saying I'm a team player. Everybody has a 4.0. What makes me different? This makes you different. Nobody has lived your experiences this way. And so this brings insight that nobody else has. This is actually diversity. This is what makes you diverse. Okay? So you do this exercise, and then you begin to use storytelling to actually put it together as a story form. Before anything else, before you build a resume, before you get on LinkedIn, you build your story. Because from that, then the rest of the stuff is assets. Then you can create the rest of the stuff, right? So you first have to understand what is storytelling. And when I was brought to do this work at Microsoft, I actually didn't know what it was. I had no idea. So I took the time to connect with a lot of people on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great source to connect with people. And I did this by asking a lot of people one question. I actually, connected with them everywhere, from people at Disney, people at Coca-Cola, Hyatt, Marriott, different industries. And they call themselves storytellers in different forms. So some were producers, some were writers, some were actually movie producers. There was just many, some were songwriters. So different types of storytellers. And I asked them not what is storytelling, but what it is not, right? And clearly they came up with a lot of different answers. It took me a long time to get through them. It was very fascinating when I found this information. And so I actually compiled this, and this is what I got from all these people that gave me these answers. So storytelling is not, look at that, facts or data or opinions or possibilities. It's not the data points that you're creating about your story, your origin story. It's not the opinions of people about your brand, but you have it as a baseline. It's not marketing yourself. So when you're going to go tell your story, it's not to market yourself, but it can be used as a tool for marketing, clearly, but it's not specifically that. It's a tool, right? It's not exploitation. Very important to note, because a lot of people will use it to manipulate. Once you understand the power of your own story, you can certainly manipulate with that. So careful with that. And it's definitely not going on Instagram and saying, "Hey, I'm a storyteller because I put on a bunch of stories on Instagram." So if it's not all this, then what is it, right? What is it? I went online to try to find a whole lot of definitions. I did not find anything that was really compelling, so I came up with my own answer. Based on these answers, I created this definition of storytelling. It's the emotional transfer of all that stuff. So when you think about your origin story, the exercise of your dots, when you're thinking about all those opinions from people that have told you what they believe, how you show up, you take all that information and you put it in a form that will actually capture someone's heart with emotion. You're going to insert your character, your plot, and your conclusion, and you're going to come in with a story. And that story is going to connect with people and go, whoa, I need to know more, right? It's the difference between I went to so-and-so university, right? And graduated with 4.0. It's the difference between that and going, my parents worked 3 jobs to get me to that university. That story. And I want to go, whoa, I want to learn more, right? That's what storytelling does for personal branding, for anything really. But where do we begin? Well, for me, when I was doing this work at Microsoft, I was already into my career and I was brought in to do some storytelling for data and AI and security. And I didn't know how to marry technology stories with human connection, right? With emotions. And so at the time I was taking a master's course in design thinking. And I asked my professor, hey, can I use this model for prototyping stories? And they said, absolutely, of course, you can use whatever you want. You can prototype whatever you want. So I did. And this is what I came up with. This is the 5 models of design thinking. And you notice I highlight empathy because it starts and it ends, it's really a cycle with empathy. And I found that very compelling. And I found that also very disturbing because I had to ask myself, wait, am I empathetic? And I took a test. It's called Clifton Strengths, and I failed the test. Actually, from empathy, I'm number like 33 out of 35 attributes of empathy. And I was like, okay, I can't even do this work, right? I'm not even empathetic. But then I learned that you can actually become an empath. That is a soft skill that we can all hone into, which is really cool because now I'm more empathetic than I used to be. And I hope to be more later. It's a growth process. But you can start by empathy and you have to understand what it is. I also didn't understand. Like I knew the concept, I knew the definition, but how do you become an empath, right? I had to understand the concept differently. And I did a lot of research again about empathy. And I went into Psychology Today and found a definition that really captured me. And it's this idea that empathy is the experience of understanding another person's life, thoughts, lived experience, culture, likes and dislikes. You know, it's not just putting yourself in someone else's shoes, it's walking a whole lot in those shoes before you get it. Right? That's empathy. So I was like, whoa, that's heavy. That's a lot. That's a lot of work, right? Where do we start? I learned that there's 3 levels of empathy. The first one is called cognitive empathy. And that type of empathy, it's simply just reminding ourselves that people we connect with are human. That's beautiful. You know why? Because it removes this authority level idea and it brings us to a level of humanity. When I talk to someone, I'm talking human to human. When I'm talking to you right now, I don't know you. I've never met you in person. I've never had that honor. Maybe I never will. But I just know you're human. And by that, I can level myself off, can connect with you at that very human level, no matter where you come from, no matter how you identify yourself. You and I are human. And that enables me to connect with you with my story at the human level. It moves me away from that's a big CEO, that's a big president, that's a big, politician. It's we're human. The person I'm talking to is human. I can come and deliver my story at a human level and it will work. The next level is actually emotional empathy. And that's the idea that we are human. With that notion, then I allow myself to be a little bit more vulnerable in my story. And I can share some things that because the person next to me is human, they probably have gone to too, right? I can share some moments and ideas that maybe I'm like, oh, this probably just happened to me. No, there's a huge, probability that it happened to someone else in this 8 billion people planet, right? So I allow myself, I'm actually being empathetic to myself at a different level, more than just thinking of people as human. I bring myself into that circle. And then the last one is compassionate empathy, right? It's I am human. I'm human. And for that reason, I am now going to hone into my own emotions, let myself be human. Don't let myself like, oh, I'm perfect. I'm always have to show up polished. It's okay to make a little bit of mistakes. I'm learning. It's a process. Being kind to myself. I'm being empathetic to myself in my humanity, in my emotions. That enables me to show up authentic to my audience. Now I don't have to show up every time perfectly polished. Hey, I'm human. It's okay. Oh, I misspelled something on the resume. I tried. I really tried. I'm human, right? And you allow yourself you forgive yourself for the mistakes or whatever, and you learn and you move on and you fix it, right? That's empathy. And so when you drop that idea to storytelling for personal branding, you look at something like the theory of, Maslow's theory of, oh God, I forgot the name. This pyramid right here, and it's a theory around the idea that we all have needs, the theory of needs. And as humans, we have core human needs, right? Anything from basic needs, food, water, to actually just feeling self-accomplished. And there's a whole lot that comes in there. So in your personal brand, you think, okay, who am I talking to and what needs can I appeal to? There's a whole bunch of humans out there that my story will probably get to. In my case, it was those girls, right? I gave myself a purpose because I thought, wow, they probably are getting bullied too. So I'm going to go tell that story, and I'm going to connect to these younger women. I call them my girls, younger girls, women in tech. And I'm going to ask myself, what am I trying to do with the story, right? If I share my story of bullying, what am I trying to do? And I had to define that character. I had to say, okay, first I need to define who I'm going to be in the story, right? I could be anyone. So I thought about a story mission, the audience, which were the girls, a character, who was I going to be in the story, the plot and the conclusion, right? The end goal for my story. You have had stories in your life. You continue to have stories. You will have more stories. Who does that story serve, right? Who are you in the character of that story that enables the audience somehow? And what does it enable them to do? That is personal branding. Think about everyone you know that is branding themselves really well. Typically, they inspire with some message, right? They're serving you. They've captured you because they have branded themselves in a way that they have a message to give you. They have a story to tell, and they've branded themselves with that story, right? So that's what you're doing. Same thing. It's the same idea. What I have here is a Robin, not a Batman, because I realized in my own story for this one, I was going to be the sidekick. The girls were going to be the heroes. Do you know why? Because the end goal for me was to close the gender gap, right? To make sure that that gap was going to be, that we were going to increase that percentage point of women in tech. And I was probably going to drop soon, right? A few years later, I'm probably going to retire. I don't know. I'll pivot. I don't know what I'm going to do next. And they're going to come up and they're going to be mid-career level. And they're going to go and they're, it's going to be a continuous line of them and their daughters and their daughters' daughters, right? If we all leave, we don't have the gap. I mean, we will have a greater gap. If we stay, if I enable them to stay, if I help them stay, if I say, hey, listen, I can't remove the bullies, but we can create this community here. We can talk about it and we can empower each other. Then they stay. And they do that with their own. They pay it forward, right? So that became my mission. This is how it works. At the time, I created 2 personal attributes, overarching attributes of my brand. From that baseline that I got, I told you I had a lot of different answers. 2 things stood out for me. One of them was sarcastic. I showed up very sarcastic, and I was like, so what? I'm like, that's okay. And the second one is I showed up feminist. So feminist, sarcastic. And when I decided to target myself for these women, I said, well, how does that show up for those women? For my target audience? Does that show up well? I mean, attributes are just attributes. They're not good or bad. They just are, right? So depending on your audience, you're going to choose your overarching attributes. You're going to choose to modify them or enhance them, whatever you want. But for me, when I showed up like that, I was like, well, maybe that might not work. Here's why. I studied the audience. Right? When I decided that was going to be my target, I was like, well, They don't like sarcasm because it shows up authoritative. I'm not relatable. I won't be able to tell my stories. They're not going to tune in, right? I'm going to show up untrustworthy if I show up sarcastic. The other one was feminist. Of course, I'm a feminist. I grew up in the slums of Venezuela. I had to fend for myself. I was the middle child. My mom was very feminist. I'm feminist. 3 daughters. So, of course. But I also learned here in the States, specifically, that that can be misconstrued as extremist, right? So it can show up as I'm an extremist. The actual nobility of the notion of feminism is good, right? It's exactly what I stand for. It's equality. But it can be seen as extremist. And again, extremist does not really show up well in this cohort that I was targeting. So I dialed it down. And I went from feminist to feminine. So I kept my feminine attributes, how I stand up as a woman, how I show up as a woman, right? To relate to them. And then I was like, sarcasm, not too good. I'm going to put kind. I'm going to brand myself as a kind person. I literally went home and I said, hey guys, no more sarcasm in the house. Which we're still working on that, but we're trying, right? We're trying. It's a work in progress. So that's something you get to do. You get to look at your attributes. You get to look at your baseline, all those opinions of your people that are telling you how you show up. And you go, okay, if I'm going to brand myself, as a techie for an IT company, for a tech company, if I show up super, unassertive, I'm going to have to change that. I'm going to have to work on being assertive and show up assertive. Right? That's how branding works. You get to actually work on, show up, modify those attributes to present yourself the best way to the target audience. And so for me, it was feminine and kind because my girls, so it wasn't the world anymore. The world's too big. My girls, they need that reassurance that they belong. That feeling that I was going to spark is belonging, because I don't have to explain to people what belonging means. It's a universal feeling, right? I don't know these girls too much. I only know demographics about them, but I know that they need to belong. That's the pyramid of needs that I showed you. So I can talk about belonging and they're going to tune in, right? I can talk about imposter syndrome. They're going to tune in. So think about the need. Let's elevate this a little bit to a company, right? You're talking about your company. You want to target Microsoft as a company to work for. Great. Microsoft is an entity. Right? Microsoft is an entity. It has core values. It has friends and foes. It was born one day. It has a mission. It's an entity. You can target it as an entity, and you can say, okay, I've learned enough about Microsoft to know, for example, that their feeling is empowerment. Well, I have a story about when I wasn't empowered and how I value empowerment because of that. Right? So I'm going to show up as someone who values empowerment too. So when I get to talk to someone at Microsoft, I can say, hey, I understand why empowerment is so powerful as a brand, as an attribute, because I wasn't empowered for many years. This happened to me. Whoa, right? Now you're giving me more, and I can understand how you're aligning culturally the values of an entity to who you are, to the brand. You see how that works? So that works with everything. That works with an entity or with another person, with a cohort. So for me, it was a cohort. And then I said, well, in order to do what? To close that equality gap. In order for you to get a job, in order for you to whatever, that's your goal, right? You decide to fill that in with your branding, with your story. But that's how it works, right? And then you give your story a mission. So you have a brand mission, your personal brand, and then you go, okay, don't forget your story. You've got a story. You give that story a mission. Hey, I'm going to dedicate this story to, in my case, my girls. I'm going to find out what kind of stories they like, because I have a lot of stories. I can pick from those data points, from those transformative moments. And I can help them, once again, in my case, belong, right? And make them feel, well, I can help them close the gap and make them feel like they belong. And that's how you give yourself a purpose. Can you have many different audiences? Sure. Should you? I recommend you target one audience, because likelihood is that you're going to increase that audience and expand it later on. But if you stay targeted, your message will always be the same. And it's easy to have overarching attributes, because now it becomes my barometer, right? I say, hey, did that email I sent was feminine and kind? Did the way I dress up was feminine and kind? Did the way I show up on social media, is it feminine and kind? Now I'm consistently thinking about my brand, and now I'm being consistent, even though my stories may vary, my channels may vary. I'm not surprising anyone when I show up, because I'm consistently showing up within those attributes. That's how that works, right? So consistency is important in branding. When you think again about those, people that brand themselves really well, they're consistent. They show up even though the content may be different. They're consistently something. You can't pinpoint it, but like, oh, that's Miri. That's who she is, right? Because I've branded myself that way. So then you get to ideate. So again, the 5 steps of design thinking. You empathize. Empathize with your audience, find out who they are, research, find out what they like, what they don't like, where they live, right? I had to understand my audience lives on Instagram. So I had to go to Instagram because that's where they live. Find out what they like, what they don't like, learn. If it's something, so the empathize phase is probably the most critical phase of design thinking. So you empathize with your audience, you empathize with yourself, give yourself ideas to how you're going to come up with what story. It is daunting. It is scary. It is something that you're going to think of, like, oh, nobody's going to care. Nobody wants to know my story. That's what I thought. And then people got super curious about who I was because I put myself out there. So yes, they do care. Your stories don't have to be extraordinary. They're just yours. And because they're yours, people connect to that because we are curious about each other. That's as simple as it gets. So then you empathize, you define your character, your plot, your conclusion, you define your story mission. How are you going to go do that? And then you ideate. Okay, I have a character. Okay, I have a plot. I'm going to go show up feminine and kind. I'm going to tell stories about me being bullied so that they can connect with me and I can start talking about it more. What if I eliminated something from my story? Now you get to ideate. Ideation phase is really about brainstorming. You have an idea, you have a baseline, you have kind of like a plot and conclusion, a story mission. Go have fun with this. The brainstorming, the ideation phase is probably the most fun. You get to do many things with this idea of your story. You get to create different concepts of story because you're going to prototype them later on. So you can Google, brainstorming tools. You're going to get a whole lot of things. Mind mapping, storyboarding, 6-hat thinking, Scamper is one of them. Lots of ways you can actually look at the story, angle the story, layer the story. I often ask people, hey, if you had to tell me in one color what your story is, what would be the color of your story? Right? Think about that. What would it smell like? Think about that. So add layers. What if I modify my character and no longer talked about bullies, but I talked about that one person, that man who grabbed my arm and said, hey, you're not going anywhere. Kind of a hero, right? In my story, because I would have left had he not grabbed me. So those are things, those are points, those are characters, those are angles to the story that you can present differently anytime you have something else, because your story keeps evolving. It has different angles, right? So you're going to be able to ideate many things. So this is a Scamper. It's an idea. It's one of the brainstorming tools that you can use. I use this a lot in my own storytelling. And then you prototype, right? So now you have an idea of the layers of your story. How are you going to present it? You go, hey, Miri, should I do a video? Should I do a blog? Do I start on Medium? Do I get on Instagram? I don't know. You know, because you've done research with your audience. You know where to go. You know where they are. You know what they like. When I do stories for IT pros, for example, I have learned the hard way that they don't like podcasts. They don't like they don't like videos. They prefer blogs. They prefer to read something very concise with bullet points that tells them the how-tos and then give them information for something else, for more material, whether it's a video or a white paper or whatever. We learned that because we tested that. We did different prototypes. We did all the podcasts. We did all the different things. And we tested it. So that's what you're going to go do too. You're going to go and say, oh, I don't know. Should I start with this? Maybe. Create, ideate, and say, well, I'm going to start on LinkedIn. I'm going to put a post on LinkedIn. Okay, great. How's it going to start? Well, here you have 8 basic techniques to storytelling. There's many more than this. This is just 8 basic ones. There's 1,000 of them. And if they don't exist, you get to create a new one because you're a storyteller. So you can build whatever you want. It's your story. Here you have in the middle, this guy falling in the middle of a hole. That one is called in media res. It stands for, in Latin, for in the middle of things, right? Things that come in right in the middle of the story. So a climax point. My mother died when I was 5. Whoa. Okay, tell me more. That's a shocker, right? That's a storytelling technique. Another one is the drama, the mountain. You see a little the mountain going beep, beep, beep. A lot of very dynamic storytelling, lots of highs and lows, really kind of deep highs and lows, and it drops real fast. Then you have the Lion King at the bottom, the little lion circle. That is the storytelling journey that's called a hero's journey. A lot of us have the storytelling technique. We use it all the time. Hollywood uses it all the time. Brands use it all the time. It's the storytelling technique that helps you talk about transformation because we all have it. We grow, we evolve. So Now, when you can use many different ways. Look them up. The idea is that you take them on a journey, right? Storytelling works when people can see themselves in the story. That's why when you watch a movie or you hear a song that captures you, you see a little bit of yourself there. That's why it captures you. So you're intending to build something that your audience is going to go, oh, I want to learn more. That really captures my attention. It stopped me from scrolling, right? So you're going to create different prototypes. You're going to go out there and then you're going to test them. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of things that I've done, but I've built equity, right? So this journey I started, 8 years ago. And today I can post something like this on LinkedIn. I can post my dog's birthday on LinkedIn. Now, I clearly did not start with this, right? I didn't start with posting my dog's birthday on LinkedIn. Now I have, and now I can, because I've learned my audience so much that I know what they like and what they don't like. Because I've tested it, I've prototyped, right? I learned they like a lot of pictures. They like relational things, my relationship with my dog. They like to celebrate things. I learned that the content they like is typically 3 things. It is educational, so it teaches them something, it brings an insight. It is inspirational, it inspires them in some way, right? Clearly, they want to be inspired. And it is personal. They want me to show up as a person. They don't always want me to show up as Miri, the head of global internships at Microsoft, right? That's boring. That's one layer of who I am, right? I'm multi-layered. I'm a dog owner. I'm a sister. I'm a friend. I'm a wife. All these things, when I show up a little bit of that, they get intrigued. Oh, there's Miri. Now she's talking about her son. Oh, there's Miri. She's talking about ice cream, right? I'm giving them layers of who I am. So that's an example of things that I have learned by knowing my audience. Well, Miri, what if I put that on LinkedIn and nobody likes it? Or worse yet, somebody's going to say that shouldn't happen on LinkedIn. I'm glad you asked, because I've had that plenty of times. I've had people go on my posts and say, this is not Facebook. And I'm like, well, thank you, Captain Obvious. This wasn't for you. Delete and block. Why? Because it wasn't for my audience. I know what my audience wants, and I gave them what they wanted. And guess what? I've grown my audience, because now it's expanding. People want to see the authenticity that you bring, and they are tuned into, even if you're not their target audience, right? They're not your target audience. So that's what I've done. And then, on Twitter, for example, I have a more technical audience. I have a lot of people from Microsoft. I have a lot of people from industry and marketing. So my content varies, right? I'm not always putting my dog everywhere. I'm not putting the same thing on every channel. Clearly, I understand and I've studied my audience. So I've gained an audience on Twitter, and my content is different. And how I show up is different. I allow myself to be a little more sarcastic and sassy because they appreciate it, right? And then on Instagram, clearly Instagram is about my girls, right? My content consistently is to them, that inspiration. I share my travels, I share myself, I share, bloopers, I show up on manicured, whatever. It's just all these layers of who I am, because they live there. So I'm in their space consistently reminding them, this is me, this is me, this is me. Branding, 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 right? And guess what happened over the years, right? People got curious. They started Googling me. Now I have a Google panel, right? Now I have a Google panel. If you Google yourself today, and number 1, somebody else shows up, that's a problem. Number 2, nothing shows up, that's a problem. You don't have digital presence. Nobody's getting curious about who you are. But guess what? My life is ordinary. I don't do a whole lot of amazing things. I just live and I share it, and people get curious. That is the magic of storytelling, right? So you test it. You test your stories. You ideate, you prototype, and you begin to tell them. Now, have I flatlined on some content? Absolutely. So I've learned. If I aim content to my audience and they don't like it, they're not going to connect. Nobody likes it. So I'm like, okay, got to change something. Got to go back and ideate. It didn't evoke the emotion that I wanted from them, right? If I aimed at making them feel like they belonged, didn't work, go back, prototype, ideate, do another, brainstorming tool. You're the storyteller. You're the one who knows your audience. That's going to enable you to do the next thing. Change it, test it again, test it again, test it again. What you do with that is you're training yourself to pitch who you are based on your own core values, your own convictions, and your own story. Throughout my life journey, I had to think about who I was intentionally, not who people said I was, not who society thought that I was, not who coworkers thought that I was. I came in and I said, no, that's not who I am. Actually, I'm this. And this is how I'm going to show up consistently to remind you this is who I am. And that's how it works. And now people get to know you. People get to understand you. Now you have your own convictions. You can pitch yourself clearly, fast. You can have a 5-minute interview and say, hey, here's where I came from. Here's what I do. Here's what I'm about. Here's my mission. Here's who I talk to. Here's my target audience. And that's exactly how you pitch yourself. So remember, your origin story is your differentiator, nothing else. I see thousands of resumes with thousands of 4.0s, with thousands of great universities all the time. What's going to differentiate you is your story, the values that you bring, and why. Why? That's your purpose, right? Stories are for your audience, not to your audience. What does that mean? That means that you get time to craft them. That means that you build them, that you consistently evolve them just as you evolve. Clearly, I'm not the same person I was 8 years ago. My stories change, my format changes. Now I'm doing a whole lot more video because that's the thing people are doing. I wasn't into that at all. I'm typically not that person, but I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I need to, because that's what my audience needs. You begin to build on that over and over. So you craft them for your audience. You craft them carefully. That's a storyteller, right? Not to your audience, just dump them. Okay, I can build my story. Here it is. Here's my resume. Done. Inconsequential. You ideate. You create. We're all creators. We have this incredible cognitive ability to create. Allow yourself to get creative, to do different things. Trust your intuition when you share your stories. And finally, do it with heart. That's what's going to make you authentic. That's what's going to get people curious about you. When you come out and you say, I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to do this with intention and with heart. And it shows up and it transcends screens and it transcends, pages. It really gets from one heart to the other, because at the end, we're connecting human to human. That's it. I hope you connect with me. I know there's a lot to unpack here in this session, but that hopefully will help you get started. I know we're probably going to go into questions right now. I wrote a book about brand storytelling. Actually, this book will help you if you want to grab it. It really is around the details of that, the ethics of storytelling, the manual of storytelling. And if you have any more questions, we can't get through all of them today, connect with me and feel free to ask me that question later on. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can get into the questions. I don't know if we're going to answer them right away. I'll pass the mic back to Jay. Jay, you there? I don't know if we're taking questions. Okay, we have some comments. Let me just actually go into the comments. Oh, hello. I have some people saying hi. All right. I think we have some time for questions. So let's go ahead, and if you have any questions, you can put them on the chat. Everyone, thanks for joining. Let's go ahead and answer some questions if you guys have them. Thank you, Joshua, for saying that. I appreciate it. If you don't have any questions, it's probably because I was so good, right? I'm just kidding. No questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining. I hope that this was helpful to you and that you take these insights, learn them, and that you use them in your own space. It's worked for me. It is a long haul approach. It's not going to be immediate. Absolutely not. You're going to start, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to take those learnings and fix it and do it again until it starts to work. But when it starts to work, you'll see how amazing it is. You'll see how people will respond to your content, whether it's an employer, whether it's a friend, whether it's a target audience. You'll see how people respond because it works. It's worked for me, and it's worked for people who have tried it as well. They've used different methods probably, but this method for me was what I learned, and it works. So hopefully it works for you. Thank you again. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.